don't know if you've noticed, but the publishing industry is basically running on internet trends right now. Okay, fine, maybe you have noticed, and maybe you are just as sick of it as I am. In which case, hi, hello, welcome. Make yourself comfortable as I vent about book trends that I hope never to see again for the next 20 minutes or so. On a more serious note though, I have to preface this video by saying that none of the things that I'm going to talk about are inherently bad, nor am I judging anybody who partakes in them. They're just things that I personally find annoying or maybe things that I've seen a little bit too much of in the past few years. And I figure the end of the year is a metaphorically appropriate time to talk about things that you never want to see again. I also saw this video by Leonie, known here on YouTube as the Book Leo, last year. And I said to myself, if I was still making videos by the end of this year, I was going to make my own version of it. So here we are. And to kind of build on that earlier caveat, I don't mean this video to be perceived as the BookTok situation just got worse type of commentary channel video here on YouTube. I more think that it's interesting to zoom out at the end of a year or two and just sort of try to observe some trends that have been going on in the publishing industry and the way that books are being published, what kind of book is being published, and why. Speaking of books being published, I've recently been learning a lot more about how exactly that happens with today's sponsor, Masterclass. In case you haven't heard of it before, a Masterclass membership gives you access to thousands of lessons from over 200 instructors. Arts, business, design, gaming, sports, you name it, you can learn about it for just $10 a month, billed annually. On the topic of publishing and getting published, I've recently been listening to Roxane Gay and David Baldacci's classes on how to get published, and it's been super useful to get a better understanding of what to expect from your relationship with a literary agent, for example, or just understanding how advances and royalties get negotiated. And I've also been getting some ideas about what a query letter should look like. Not that I'm in any position to be sending any of those at this point, but I just feel like there's so much to know when it comes to the business side of publishing that you can never really know too much. I've been listening to these lessons on my walks a lot at the moment, thanks to Masterclass's option to only listen to the audio, which means that you can just kind of play the lessons like a podcast, which I absolutely love. What can I say? I really love my little walks. And I also love the flexibility to listen to like a 10-minute lesson or a 20-minute lesson whenever I have the time around all the other things that I have going on in my life. So if you want to give it a go, check out Masterclass at the link in the description to get 15% off and start turning your professional aspirations into achievements. The first thing I'm ready to never see again for the rest of my life are cartoon book covers on romance books. I cannot fully articulate the visceral reaction that the sight of them gives me, and I'm speaking as somebody who does enjoy a romance book every now and then, although my content here is mostly about my academic background and my more literary choices. I've read maybe 3 or 4 romance books this year. I enjoy them. They're silly, they're fun. Whenever I don't want to think about anything, I read one of them. I can't bring myself to read them on anything other than on a Kindle because holding one of these covers makes me feel like a child. And this is a personal preference. I understand that the world does not revolve around me, nor does it have to conform to my personal preferences and tastes, but it is related to my only real problem with the romance genre, which is the way that it's being marketed to a far too wide range of age demographics. There's a good video about this by a creator called Sara Elizabeth here on YouTube, who goes in a bit more detail about the way in which book cover art has evolved over the years. But to make a long story short, and you don't need me to tell you this, book cover design is a huge component of a book's commercial success, especially in the age of social media and with the emergence of communities like BookTube, Bookstagram, BookTok, etc., where the book object is itself the main component of what the content is about sometimes. And this is particularly true for Instagram. I've been posting on the book side of Instagram, the infamous Bookstagram, since 2017. And the amount of times I've seen people complain about how ugly certain book covers are, to the point where they felt like they couldn't really review the book because the picture of the book cover would have ruined their feed aesthetic, is kind of depressing. I have to say. I don't want to harp on that too much though, because people judging books by their cover has been a thing long before social media was a thing. In fact, the idiom to judge a book by its cover has been around for centuries at this point. I also want to point out that while the moral teaching behind the metaphor, don't judge a book by its cover, is to look beyond appearances, from a reader's perspective, cover design is a helpful tool to understand what the book might be about or what the overall vibe is, and we see this all the time across all genres. Thrillers and horror books have a far more ominous look about them than Uplit does. They don't just function as a marketing tool, but they also help build readers' expectations or function as a warning. Don't buy this type of book if you're not into darker themes and plot lines. And this is precisely why this whole wave of cartoon cover art for romance books is getting so many people riled up, including myself. I have spent many minutes of my life on this channel defending women's rights to read a smutty book every now and then, because I believe that informed and consenting adults can do whatever they want with their time. Emphasis on informed and adults, though. Because what kind of information is this cover conveying to the average reader? Who is it telling that it was made for? I, personally, as an adult, would not reach out for this if I didn't already know that there is a trend in marketing romance books in this way. I'm not saying that I'm the only person ever to bring this up by any means, but I also don't see a huge amount of people, especially in the context of sort of mainstream criticism of the romance genre, bring up the complete lack of explicit age guidelines and trigger warnings in these books. I also understand the desire from people who work with romance books to move away from those dated covers of incredibly ripped men coming to the rescue of almost naked damsels in distress. I fully understand why the modern woman wouldn't necessarily want to buy a book with that on the cover. But I do think that the similarities between the way young adult books are illustrated and some of these smuttier books are illustrated are a little bit uncomfortable to see. Since we're on the topic of romance, the second thing that I'm ready to never see again are age gap romance books. I'm not saying never do it in real life. I understand that sometimes life surprises you and to some extent you can't really help who you fall in love with some limits, of course. And I also get the appeal, at least in theory, of an older man or an older woman. Unless everybody involved is like 30 plus, I'm not interested. All of these, she's a 23-year-old student and he's a 50-year-old CEO plot lines, I don't know, they don't make me feel anything. I'm bored of them. All I can think is she should be at the club, he should be at the rheumatologist. I don't get it. The third thing I'm ready to let go of are reading challenges. I feel like I've already said this on this channel like 1,000 times, but here I go again. Reading a large number of books is not going to inherently make you a well-read person. Just like taking a lot of pictures on your phone doesn't make you a photographer, or eating a lot of food doesn't make you a food critic. I don't mean to say that I'm against setting any type of goal for oneself, especially for people who maybe are just getting back into reading after not reading for a while, or who maybe want to make reading a thing for themselves and they need this more tangible target that they can work towards. And I also fully understand that some people need a slightly more structured way to approach life in order to do all of the things that they want to do with their time, and that's perfectly fine. But the way that we've been gamifying every single hobby over the past few years is really unsettling to me in a way that I can't quite put my finger on. Something that I realized recently, and I genuinely don't know why it took me so long, is that it seems like every single hobby nowadays has like a habit tracking app that relates to it. If you want to take up running or cycling, you go on Strava. If you like movies, you get Letterboxd. If you like books, you have Goodreads or some other reading tracking app. If you want to learn a language, you get Duolingo. Like all of these things where you can track that you did the thing every single day. And to some extent, they are helpful because they are motivating you to do a thing that is good for you every single day, by making you feel like you don't want to ruin your streak. But they also end up making you more obsessed with numbers and outcome rather than the experience of doing the thing itself. This is not related to books, but I specifically think about the Duolingo app when I think about this. I have so many friends who love to brag about how they have like an 800-day streak of learning Spanish or French or whatever, but they can barely say a couple of sentences in that language. And this is just a small example, but it really goes to show that time spent doing something is not indicative of how meaningfully you engage with that thing. The thing about reading challenges that stands out to me the most is the way that it's become a little bit of a competition between readers online. No one wants to admit that they're competing with each other because we all know that that's not the point of reading as a hobby, but they're not removing their reading stats from their Instagram bio either. So it's also worth pointing out that the platform that started this sort of reading challenge tradition, to my knowledge, is Goodreads, which is owned by Amazon, and where every book listed comes with a link to buy the book from Amazon, which from a business perspective is genius, I have to say. I kind of wish I'd come up with that. Unfortunately, I was learning how to walk when they were setting up the company, But yeah, it's very clever. You're basically telling people, hey, come join my fun reading challenge, but we're all challenging each other to be better than last year. So you should probably set a higher goal than last year, and you should also probably buy more books than you did last year from my company. As I say, genius. And since we're on the topic of consumerism, another thing that I'm ready to let go of are special editions, book merch that has nothing to do with books, and just more generally book paraphernalia. Another thing that I feel like I mention in almost every video, but it never quite feels like it's being said enough. The commodification of literature is reaching dystopian heights. And as always, I'm going to caveat this by saying that I'm not advocating for not collecting books or saying that you should never have any unread books on your shelf. On the contrary, in one of my old videos, I mentioned this metaphor I came across, which speaks of unread books as wine bottles that you are keeping in your cellar until the right time to savor them comes along. And I do love that imagery and this idea that you don't keep empty bottles in your cellar. And in the same way, you're not only going to keep books that you've already read in your house. Like, what's the point in that? Of course, you can refer to them again, or maybe you can recommend them to your friend, but you have to have something to pick up whenever you feel ready to jump into a new story. I do, however, have some reservations around this special edition trend, which kind of pushes people to buy the same book with a slightly different cover again and again. It used to be the case in publishing that a particularly popular book would get a new version on like a 10-year anniversary, or when it won a prize, when it went from hardback into paperback, or if it got a screen adaptation, you would get a cover that was basically a picture from the movie. But what's happening at the moment is that books that a publisher knows will do well, either because of the concept or because they're part of a series or because the author is widely popular, get launched in multiple different editions from the very first publication to trigger this collector's instinct in people. Although I'm not sure, I kind of want to say that this started off with YA novels and specifically fantasy books that were part of a larger series, so they had the time to garner a very dedicated fandom, but it's now become a practice in pretty much any genre. It seems like every time a new Sally Rooney book comes out, on top of the t-shirts and tote bags and bucket hats and posters and whatever else, there are also at least 2 or 3 different colorways for the book. And I use the word colorway here on purpose because it really does feel like people just go to the bookstore and buy the book in every color, in the way that they would buy a t-shirt that they like in every color. And if you're thinking that this is at least good for bookstores, especially independent bookstores, then sure, fine, we agree. But it's confusing that this should be happening with an author like Sally Rooney, who refers to herself as a Marxist and who has openly stated her concerns about the commodification of literature. She has been quoted as saying, "I'm very skeptical of the way in which books are marketed as commodities, like accessories that people fill their homes with, like beautiful items you can fill your shelves with and therefore become a sort of book person." That's a bit ironic, no? This next one might be a little bit controversial, but personally, I feel like I've seen enough Greek myth retellings.
This debut is an epic feminist retelling of the story of notorious Spartan queen Clytemnestra. This feminist retelling of Greek mythology reimagines the story of Aeneas and the women once left at the fringes of his story, the powerful feminist retelling of Phaedra and her undying quest for justice.
A mesmerising retelling of ancient Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, the heroines is a powerful reimagining of Greek tragedy, a powerful feminist retelling of an ancient tale, a dazzling feminist retelling of Greek myth, a brilliant new voice reveals the untold story behind the Trojan War.
I really recommend this video by Alexandra here on YouTube if you have around an hour or so to kill and you want to hear a little bit more about the Greek myth retelling boom that was everywhere a couple years ago. Needless to say that the concept is not at all new, but there was definitely something in the water towards the end of the 2010s, early 2020, because these books were everywhere. It's difficult to say whether this was an exclusively publishing related trend where somebody, probably Madeline Miller, wrote a novel that reimagined the story of a mythical figure and it sold really well, so then publishers just rushed to try and replicate that success, or if it was a more organic zeitgeisty phenomenon where people genuinely felt compelled to rewrite world famous stories from the perspective of the women who existed in the background of these stories, potentially off the back of social developments like the Me Too movement, for example. One of the possible reasons why I'm over this type of novel is that at one point I was really into them. Like back in 2017, I was super into Madeline Miller and everything she had published. I loved The Song of Achilles, I loved Circe, and I was genuinely waiting for them to get turned into TV series. I thought this would be the next Game of Thrones. They weren't, and that's fine. They're still very good books. But as more and more of these books started coming out and being aggressively marketed as feminist retellings without there being anything substantially feminist about them, I started to become a little bit skeptical of them. And I started to understand people who sometimes put forward the criticism that just because a novel is written by a woman or has a female character at the middle of it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a feminist work of art. And on top of that, just because you're centering a member of a marginalized community within your story doesn't mean that they have automatically gained more agency in the context of the story. We may be getting a first-hand account of what their experience of oppression is like, but they are still oppressed. Another thing that I've seen a lot of people criticize about these books, and which I agree with, is that a lot of them seem to rely to a great extent on name recognition. So you may not know the name of the author, maybe this is their first book or their other books weren't that successful, but you will know the name Persephone or Helen of Troy or Cassandra. And so it's impossible not to wonder how much of the myth retelling device is used because the author genuinely feels like there's another layer to the story that hasn't been told yet and needs to be told, and how much of it is just another publishing gimmick. And lastly, in this list of things that I'm ready never to see again, I want to talk about YouTube. Specifically, I want to talk about the book content that follows the formula I read BooKtok's worst X book, so you don't have to. And it's basically just somebody reading a shitty book, which they know to be shitty, to rage bait their audience into talking shit about the book with them. I find this content niche so strange because while I agree that criticism of various aspects of society and online trends is very useful, especially when geared towards finding solutions or at least having conversations about how we as a collective may be able to combat certain negative aspects of social media, for example. I don't see how reading paragraphs from a Colleen Hoover book for 45 minutes and stopping to make a face at the camera and say, oh, this is so bad, is bringing about change. Or even how it's encouraging your audience to read something other than Colleen Hoover. How is that anything other than outrage content? The thing that ticks me off the most about this is that the same creators who are shocked about the level of success that Colleen Hoover has achieved and who dedicate entire videos to explaining why people shouldn't be reading Colleen Hoover and authors like her don't actually post content about books which they believe to be good and which they would like people on the internet to engage with. Which begs the question, are they criticizing shitty romance books because they want to create an online space where people only read good books? Or are they making it because they know it will get views? And I hope this doesn't come across as me saying that I'm above doing things in order to get views. I am super grateful to be monetized on YouTube and to be able to do this as a source of income. And I fully understand that once content creation becomes your full-time job, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. But then if everybody does that, then we have no right to complain about the fact that audiences only interact with bad books. And this topic applies to audiences as well, because I see a lot of people in everybody's comment section complaining about how nobody makes thoughtful, slow reading book recommendation videos anymore. I've only made 2 book recommendation videos on this channel, and that's a personal preference. I feel like my favorite books say a lot about me, and I'm not ready to be that vulnerable on the internet yet. I'm getting there though. But this to say that sure, it might be the case that the YouTube algorithm is used to me creating video essays, and therefore it only recommends or pushes video essays to my audience. That being said, there is a stark difference between the number of views that a sat down video where I'm just talking about positive things gets, as opposed to a video where I'm not necessarily saying controversial things because that's not my style, but I am pointing flaws in one thing or other. And even speaking for myself as a viewer, I can definitely hold my hands up and say I have clicked on things that I wasn't even that interested in, but the tone of the thumbnail and the title were slightly more on the combative, if not negative, and slightly sensationalist side of things, and it piqued my interest. I wanted to know what the drama was about, you know? So I think there's definitely room for reflection on both sides, creators and audiences, since we're all complaining about the lack of nuance and thoughtful conversation on social media and online in general. I feel like we could all do a better job of creating, watching, and participating in nuanced and thoughtful conversation, and then maybe those things will become popular. That's all I have to say for this video. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you so much for subscribing to this channel over the past year. I've had so much fun creating these videos and having conversations with people and reading so many thoughtful comments. And just as I was recording this video, I hit 40,000 subscribers, which is a huge milestone for me. And it means a lot, and I hope you're here to stay. Thank you so much to Masterclass for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in my bio for 15% off your membership and start learning. And I will see you next time.